Former U.S. President Donald Trump testified at his civil fraud trial in New York today. Trump is facing a $250 million lawsuit, alleging he inflated the value of his assets by billions of dollars to get better terms on loans and insurance policies. Trump spoke briefly outside the Manhattan courtroom last hour, shortly after his testimony wrapped up.
To think that we're being sued and spending all this time and money, and yet people being killed all over the world, that this country could stop. With inflation and all of the other problems that this country has, I think it's a disgrace. And when you look at the numbers, the poll numbers that came out today from the New York Times and CBS, I'm sure the Times was not too happy. But people are sick and tired of what's happening. This is I think it's a very sad day for America. But anyway, this is a case that should have never been brought, and it's a case that should be immediately dismissed. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, the CBC's Chris Reyes is outside the courthouse. So, Chris, we just heard some of what Trump has been saying, reiterating his calls for this case to be thrown out. That I don't think is going to happen. What did we hear inside of the court today?
Yeah, I'll tell you more about that in just a second, Andrew. Yeah, Trump was on the stand for just under 4 hours testifying. He didn't raise his voice in there, Andrew, but he was very combative. And at times it seemed that he was holding a press conference more than he was testifying. He said that his properties were being taken away from him the way you would in communist China. He said that his brand is actually worth way more than what can be stated in those financial documents. He called the case very unfair. He said, I hope the public is watching. He referred directly to Attorney General Letitia James, who was sitting right in the front row. He said that this is a witch hunt. He said she should be ashamed of herself. And he repeated those kinds of combative statements as he was being asked direct questions that had to do with very specific properties. And at one point, Judge Engoron said to his lawyer, Chris Kise, please control your client. This is not a political rally. We heard from Attorney General Letitia James outside of the courthouse after proceedings wrapped about what she thought about the whole thing. Have a listen to what she said.
He rambled, he hurled insults, but we expected that. At the end of the day, the documentary evidence demonstrated that, in fact, he falsely inflated his assets to basically enrich himself and his family.
And I should also mention, Andrew, that he repeatedly dismissed those documents that's at the heart of this case. He said when it comes to borrowing money, they just didn't matter. And another anecdote that really stood out to me, Andrew, inside the overflow room, you had members of the public, just to give you a sense of how this is being taken in by some members at large that's not in the media. I asked them why they were there, and they said with snacks in hand, they were there for theater.
And so what about talk among Trump's legal team of asking for a mistrial?
That's right. So, Andrew, after Trump's testimony, Trump's lawyers, Alina Habba and Chris Kise, had about a 10-minute conversation with Judge Engoron about filing a motion for a mistrial. This is not new. This is something that they also mentioned on Friday, but they were trying to get guidance from Judge Engoron about how to file this motion, given that there is a gag order on them not to speak about anybody on the judge's staff. And they said that they were filing a motion and they wanted to be mindful of that. And then in a strange, lighthearted moment, Judge Engoron said about that motion for a mistrial that, who knows, he might grant it. So obviously details still need to work out about that. We're following exactly how that's going to unfold. The court is not in session tomorrow. And then Ivanka Trump is scheduled to take the stand on Wednesday. She is the final witness on the Attorney General's side. So we'll see if this motion for a mistrial will be filed before Trump's team starts to call their witnesses. And so far, this trial is expected to last still until December.
I want to bring in Chris Galdieri now. He's a politics professor at St. Anselm College, and he's joining us live in Manchester, New Hampshire. Chris, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Always glad to be here, Andrew.
All right, so let's just, what did you make of what we heard in the courtroom, the sparring between Donald Trump and the judge, and Donald Trump and his lawyer, at least, with the judge saying, this is not a political rally, this is a courtroom, you need to take control of your client. What did you make of some of that?
It was, sadly unsurprising. I think this is exactly what you get when you put Donald Trump on the stand and ask him to testify about his business behaviors, particularly in this case where, there's been a lot of testimony and evidence offered that his company had essentially misrepresented the value of its properties to get more favorable loan terms and more favorable insurance rates and that sort of thing. He is not someone who in the past has been a great witness on his own behalf in depositions and other legal matters. He tends to bluster. He tends to get angry at being questioned if he thinks the questions are hostile. And in this case, he clearly takes this entire matter very personally. So it's not at all surprising to me that he got into a verbal sparring match with the judge who's deciding the fate of him and his company in this case.
What about the politics of this? This is the kind of language, the kind of rhetoric that he uses. He's using it now in a courtroom, but this is getting out to voters who are going to decide whether he becomes president again.
That's correct. And I think there's a level on which Trump's strategy here, to the extent that he has one, is to try to muddy the waters, try to depict this as a political persecution rather than a legitimate legal inquiry, and hope that his fighting with the judge and that sort of thing signals to his supporters that they should stick with him. They shouldn't think of this as a legitimate inquiry into his business practices, but rather see this as a politically motivated, I think he's used words like witch hunt against himself.
The New York Times, Chris, recently put out a poll showing that Trump is ahead of Biden in some key swing states, in about 5 key swing states. So how much stock can we put in a poll this far out from the election, and what does it say that he is leading in these key swing states?
Well, I think, there's reason to be skeptical of any poll, whether it shows something you like or not, when you are a full year out from an election. Historically, you shouldn't take head-to-head polling in a presidential election that seriously until the nominees are decided, usually around April or May. That said, I think this shows that President Biden has a lot on his plate right now, and voters are not really giving him credit for the things he's done as president, and I think they're blaming him for things like the crisis in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine and so on. And I think a lot is going to come down to the types of campaigns that each candidate wages once the general election begins next year.
Okay, I appreciate you saying, we shouldn't take too much into this poll, but it is a moment in time, and the election is exactly 1 year away from today, so people are kind of thinking about it. There were some,
yes.
Chris, interesting numbers in the polls, especially around voters' perceptions of Trump's impact on democracy, and 2/3 of these swing state voters said Trump has either a good or a neutral impact on American democracy. What did you make of that finding?
Well, I think, a lot of Trump supporters to this day believe that he won the 2020 election, believe that he did nothing wrong in the wake of that election, that his actions regarding January 6th and fake electors and that sort of thing were all entirely justified. And if you're somebody who believes that, then you do probably think he had a neutral to good impact on democracy. That said, I think to the extent that Democrats want to run against January 6th, against Trump's impact on American democracy, they're going to have to affirmatively make that case in much the way that we saw Democrats do in 2022, for instance, when President Biden spoke in Philadelphia. But this is not, this is something where, Democrats who want voters to care about this are going to have to make them care about this by reminding of this throughout their campaigns.
And then just finally, Chris, what's your sense today? I know I've asked you this before, but I have to keep checking in. What's your sense today if Donald Trump is convicted in either, well, this is a civil trial, but if he does face some kind of penalty at the end or conviction at the end of one of these trials?
Well, Yeah, in this particular case, what I find interesting is that it directly addresses what Trump has always presented as his core strength, the idea that he is some sort of a business titan who would bring his business skills to work in Washington. If this case goes against him, I think that would, really undercut that argument. It would essentially be saying, actually, this was not some sort of world-class organization. It was this, sort of, family business that cut a lot of corners and broke the law, and that led to penalties for Trump. So it's possible that that might cut into some of his support. I think the greater danger for him is in the criminal trials. We have never had a former president stand trial for a criminal offense. If he's convicted of one, we honestly just don't know how the public's going to react. That New York Times poll you mentioned suggested that it would have a big impact on a fair number of voters' opinions going into the election. It might not be enough to deny him the Republican nomination, but it could lead to a situation where he has to fight essentially political trench warfare to get nominated and then be weakened going into the general election. But again, we are someplace we've never been before, so it's really tough to predict what's going to happen.
That's why it's always important to chat with you about these things. Thank you very much, Chris. Chris Galdieri, professor of politics at St. Anselm College.